Left behind. Island Breeze HVAC, serving with integrity and honoring our heroes.
I wake up, turn on my screen. There's a voice, it feels like a dream. Next door radio, my online neighbor, telling stories like no other flavor. Local talk in the palm of my hand. Dial a number, it's time to expand. Join the program, let your worries unfold. Listen and share, it never gets old.
Welcome, everyone. You're listening to the Helpers Hour on Nextdoor Radio, nextdoorradio.com, and the Nextdoor Radio app. I'm your host, Kellie Syfan, and I'm very excited today to be joined by Dr. Bree from the Landing Place. How are you this morning?
I am doing great, enjoying the rain.
Yes, it is a rainy, stormy sort of day out there.
It definitely is.
Oof, we needed it.
Uh-huh.
So I want to start with a little bit of just about yourself so we can get to know you as a provider in our area and some of the things that you do to help.
Okay. Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. As I started off with that was the one thing I was advised not to do, so I'm just going to get it over with in the beginning. So my name is Dr. Bree Revelo. Happy to be here. I opened up the Landing Place in Wake Forest, North Carolina in January of this year. And so my primary focus as a clinical psychologist is to work with kids, adolescents, and young adults. But my bread and butter is doing parenting work of kiddos who have been through trauma, who have ADHD, who might have anxiety, anything that you can kind of imagine. I provide a lot of parent work. So I provide therapy right now. I'm not doing testing at the moment, but offering therapy in Wake Forest, North Carolina.
So when you say parent work, it sounds like the kids have been through something and then you're supporting the parents in supporting the kids?
Absolutely.
Gotcha. What does that mean? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I meet with parents, they usually bring in their kiddo and they'll say, okay, so my kid just went through this huge thing. Can you help fix my kid? And I say, absolutely. I would love to journey with you and partner. But what that looks like is actually working with the parent first. And so when I say parent work, what I mean is partnering with the parents to walk through their own stuff. A lot of times parents come in with their own trauma history, their own family of origin.
Sure.
Dynamics that they haven't been able to work through. And more often than not, I only work with their kid 1 hour a week. And if I'm going to make long-standing change, I have to start with the parent. And so we do parent sessions where I get to know the parent, to understand what is coming up with them in that moment. What do they need to learn? Where do they need to go from there? And then I provide psychoeducation and support them. And through that work, we can then understand, how do I help them become whole and work through their own healing journey to then show up for their child.
Gotcha. Okay, so it sounds like in these moments, and this is something I see in my practice too, in these moments of kiddos having a really tough time, like something really big is happening and they are rocked. Their boat is completely rocked. In experiencing that as the parent, a lot of old stuff can come up.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like supporting through some of that, like, hey, let's see the lens that you're looking through so we know where you're coming from and how to be there. How does that show up for the parents that you work with?
Yeah. So how that shows up is what I see is parents will show up and they'll say, when I hear ADHD, this is what I think of. This is the stigma, or this is the lens in which I see it.
Sure.
Or they might have anxiety, or if there is a trauma situation where their child's experienced trauma, they might be triggered. And so what we want to understand is the parent coming in with a preconceived notion of a mental health issue? Where did they learn it? What messages were they told around that? How do they feel about seeking support? And so we start by unpacking all of those things first, so then we can move into, okay, awesome. Now we know where you're starting. Now we know where to go next, so that we can fill in the gaps of education or support, wherever it kind of starts. But it starts by unpacking where they're coming from.
Yeah. The visual I'm getting is the like put your oxygen mask on first.
Yes, I actually use that all the time.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yep.
Now there's a word that you use there that we hear all the time. Triggered.
Yes.
And it's in social media and it's all over the place.
Mhm.
When we're talking from a behavior analytic perspective, we're often talking about a discriminative stimulus. Like, what is that thing that says when you engage in this behavior, this result is likely? But
Yes.
I think it's a word that's overused outside of a clinical context. What does that mean in a clinical context?
So I am a very big imagery person.
Oh, you know I love that.
Yes, we have to use imagery. It's the best way to learn.
Yes.
So when I talk about triggers, what I like to do is give an example of a bear. And so we talk about what I'm wanting to describe there is how our bodies or autonomic nervous system responds to a stressor.
Pause there real quick.
Yes.
Autonomic nervous system for our listeners.
Yes, autonomic nervous system is our body's way of regulating. And so that's just a very fancy medical name for our body's response to a stressful situation.
Gotcha. So
it's a regulating
situation.
Yes, it's our regulating system. We've got a bear.
Yep.
Yes. So, what I describe to my families that I work with is a bear shows up in the room and I want them to imagine it. Oh my goodness, what is their first reaction? So if you imagined a bear was popping in here, what might you do?
I'd probably jump on this couch. Yeah, it wouldn't be my best look. It might be reminiscent of some memes, but I would be up and out of there.
You'd be totally away from the bear.
As much as I could be.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So you're jumping on, Okay, so you're jumping on the couch. Unfortunately, I'm freezing and I'm probably about to die. So that's what's likely going to happen. And so then I would have my family member describe, oh my goodness, what are they going to do? And so kids might jump or run or flee. I might freeze and somebody else might be ready for battle.
Sure.
And so what I want them to imagine in those moments is how their body naturally responds to a stressor. And through that, then we explain, okay, your body naturally is going to have a reaction. That's called a trigger to a stressful situation. And your trigger response might be a fight, flight, or freeze response.
Sure.
And so just like you're jumping on the couch, or I might be freezing and praying that this bear doesn't actually take me down, and somebody else might be fighting, we all have our own responses, but we all have our personal triggers, and those might be individual stressors in our lives that are personal to us, and those can look like a lot of different things based on our personal histories.
Gotcha. So really it's when there's true activation of that, you said autonomic nervous system. That is clinically when we're talking, this is genuinely a trigger that we're focusing in on.
Absolutely.
And those triggers are going to vary across people based on their history, based on everything that they've been through.
Yes.
I imagine when you've got parents coming in and they're going, this is not a trigger, when their kid is very triggered by their autonomic
very
nervous
activated.
system. Yeah, they're very, very activated. That's got to be a really interesting point to walk through with them of, yeah, yours is different. And how do we see and respect that? How does that come out in your work?
Yeah, great question. It comes out all the time because everybody has different responses. And it's hard to understand when we see a kid have a big reaction to something that seems very small to the outside world. So say I have a kiddo with anxiety who comes in and they might have maybe a fear of, we'll just say bugs.
Sure.
Okay. And the parent's like, oh, it seems so tiny. It seems itty bitty. I don't understand this. And so then what we do is we walk through, okay, so the kid has a response to a bug, but everything starts somewhere else. And so the child might not have had a reaction to a bug initially, but some form of stressor, traumatic event, disruption in their developmental stage might have led to a fear of bugs. And so what we want to help the parent understand is it is okay that you don't feel the same way as your child. You might never understand how your child feels about this bug in this moment. That's okay. And so how do we help the parent soothe themselves in that moment and validate some of those thoughts that they're having?
Sure.
A lot of times the parents have a lot of shame, or they might just feel kind of silly that they're like, well, I can't actually say these thoughts out loud. And that's part of the parent work, is acknowledging in that moment, this feels so ridiculous, or this feels so crazy. And it's understandable that different people have different reactions, but if we can't acknowledge and accept the parents' own thoughts and feelings, it's hard to be validating and accepting towards somebody else's that might be very different than our own.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, and behavior analysis, those like, how on earth did we go from this to fearing like a
Yes.
butterfly trying to gently
Something
land on us?
beautiful, this gentle little
Yeah.
creature.
We'll
Mhm.
often go like, okay, this is connected to that, to that, to that, and we, create these
Map it out.
maps around it. Exactly. But you're absolutely right. Sometimes the maps, like me as a person experiencing that fear, I might not know the steps in that map. I might
Right.
not understand that connection between this stimulus and this fear.
How could you?
Yeah,
Because you're in it.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. It's incredible thinking about all those little things get put together. And I think you mentioned something really important. We've talked about this on other shows,
Mhm.
that shame can be such a big block.
Mhm.
That not understanding it or being like, this is ridiculous, or why is this even happening to our family?
Right.
Those shame bits can perpetuate a lot of things. When
Mhm.
you're working with a family and you see those signs of shame coming up,
Mhm.
what are some of the things that you bring forward to help them with that?
Oof.
I know it's a really big question.
Yeah. Yeah, shame shows up in so many different ways,
Mhm.
and it shows up differently for different people. And so when I see shame, the signs that I'm kind of looking for are, is somebody avoiding a topic? Is somebody
Mm.
trying to rationalize through feeling a certain way? Is somebody really defensive, or are they becoming escalated about the topic? And so when I notice that shame, I start by slowing down
Mm.
and start to reflect. And part of the work that I do is I I use myself as a clinical tool.
Sure.
And so I have to gauge in that moment, okay, what am I feeling? And
Mhm.
so we use the relationship all the time in
Oh,
the
I
work
love
that I
that.
do.
Yep.
And so if I start to notice that shame, I have to reflect in myself, okay, I felt this before. We've all been there where we've felt the shame. And so in those moments, what do I need?
Mm.
How do I identify my needs and what that person needs? Again, everybody has an individualized need. And so I check in with myself and then I reflect back to that person. This topic seems really hard right now. I've noticed that when this is brought up, we might avoid it. We might avoid it like the plague.
Yeah.
We might be playful. We might become a little agitated.
Sure.
Tell me about the first time you talked about this, or tell me about the first memory that pops up. And so we tend to lean towards, let's go there together if you feel safe. And
Yeah.
so I don't outright name the shame,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
as we unpack it together, usually parents and even kids are able to say, wow, I felt so embarrassed. Oh, I felt so
Sure.
guilty. And then we step back and say, are we feeling guilt? Are we feeling embarrassment? Or is there an even bigger layer here?
Mm.
And parents will sometimes say, I actually feel a lot of shame. I wanted, or I should have, could have, would have. I
Mhm.
expected it to be this way and it wasn't. And so I lean into it gently if
Yeah.
somebody's open to it, but it all depends on the relationship.
Gently was the word that was coming to mind the whole time you were talking
Mm-hmm.
through that moment, because shame could be so delicate that it sounds like at the landing place, the I'm walking with you gently
Mm-hmm.
is really as we say, the vibe I'm getting,
That's
like
the vibe we're going for.
perfect,
Mm-hmm.
perfect, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. All those little steps through. And as you said, you're working not only with like trauma, but like, hey, this
Mm-hmm.
diagnosis has come forward. And
Mm-hmm.
what wraps around this diagnosis? What sort of diagnoses do you specialize in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I specialize in ADHD.
Mhm.
We've talked about trauma
Absolutely.
related to adoption,
Mm. Mhm.
foster and adoptive care systems,
Mhm.
trauma of any sort. But my specialties are really ADHD, trauma, adoption, anxiety,
Mhm.
and then behavioral difficulties. And so that might look a lot of different ways and may be
Sure.
related to several of those things. I also work with kids who experience depressive symptoms, but more often than not, it's a combination of all of the above, one or the other.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
I want to get a little bit deeper into some more of what you do when we get to the other side of this break. We're going to take a brief break, really quick. Thank you, everyone. You're listening to the Helpers Hour on Nextdoor Radio, nextdoorradio.com, the Nextdoor Radio app. We'll be back in just a moment.
This was my first massage. Tracy walked me through the entire process. It made me feel comfortable as possible. We had a delightful conversation and our studio was beautiful. I will definitely be returning for another massage very soon. This is a direct quote from a review from the Whole World Massage located at 3509 Haworth Drive, Suite 205 in Raleigh. At Whole World Massage and Med Spa, our focus is you. We love working every day with people like you, helping them look, feel, and perform with youthful energy and beauty in mind and body. Call today to see how Tracy can help you feel great today. 252-213-4478. 252-213-4478. Now's the best time of year to get more for your money on new Mahindras. Enjoy 0% interest or save thousands of dollars on rugged Mahindra tractors. That's more for less on many of Mahindra's best-selling models with tractors that deliver more lift capacity, fuel efficiency, and built-in weight. Save more on Mahindra today. Visit Vanco Outdoor Equipment, your local Mahindra tractor dealer. 0% APR. Financing available for limited time only. See us or go to MahindraUSA.com for more information. The Hub on Main, located at historic downtown Oxford, has something for everyone. And I mean everyone. Brewmate, mud pie, Tyler candles, craft beer and fine wine, gifts for the loved ones, coffee, cigars. See what I mean? The Hub on Main is your one-stop shop for all things you love. The Hub on Main is located at 100 Main Street in Oxford. They're open Monday through Sunday. Check out the Hub on Main on Facebook to check out specials, classes, meetups, and more. The Hub on Main. Stop by today.
Local coffee shop located in downtown. Oxford is here for the community. Local coffee shops and shows down. Hot coffee latte, cold brew, and my favorite, the espresso shot.
Visit the local coffee shop, She Chose Down, right now. She Chose Down is located downstairs of the Hub in downtown Oxford.
Welcome back to the Helpers Hour on Next Door Radio, nextdoorradio.com, and the Next Door Radio app. We were having a lot of fun over the break. I'm a behavior nerd.
Yes.
And so you mentioned that you work with challenging behavior
Mhm.
specifically. So I want to lean into that.
Wonderful. Let's do it.
Perfect. So tell me a little bit about some of the big triggers that you see in behavior and some of the challenging behaviors that you see. I know you mentioned over the break transitions. Is a big one that you see.
Yes.
You know I see that too. So
I
please.
know. Yes, we'll have a lot to talk about.
Yes.
Yeah, so transitions are a huge trigger for anxiety, or, when I'm working with ADHD kiddos or teens, or I'm just thinking of my ADHD kiddos right now, or my kids
Sure.
with anxiety, transitions can be very challenging.
Yes.
And so when I'm thinking about my kids with ADHD, more often than not, what I explain to parents is kids with ADHD cannot anticipate the future.
Mhm.
Developmentally, that's very normative. But with a kid with ADHD, it is extremely hard for them to anticipate, okay, these are the future events that are about to happen. This is how I need to prepare. And so if there is an unexpected shift or a change, it can become very overstimulating and very overwhelming.
Sure. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. I talk with parents sometimes like, hey, when you're on a trip and your
Mhm.
flight gets canceled?
Woo.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I'm not in a pretty place at that point.
No,
And
me
if
neither.
I think of the life of a child of like, okay, let's say we're 3, 5, even 10,
Mhm.
and all the big changes that they've had in their life,
Mhm.
probably none of them have been as big as a flight getting canceled.
Yeah.
But it's their first time experiencing this.
Mhm.
So it might feel that big. And how
Huge.
beautiful is that? That's literally the worst thing they've ever experienced
Yeah.
is that moment.
Mhm.
And to take that moment to be like, gosh,
Mhm.
this really is the worst thing you've ever experienced. I'm doing a
Yeah.
pretty good job.
Yeah.
It's
That's actually a great perspective.
a really cool like, oh, this meltdown is not, because I'm bad. This
Mhm.
meltdown is not because my child is bad. This meltdown is because this is one of the worst things they've ever experienced, and it's not that big.
Mhm. And it's the
Okay.
first time that they've walked through it.
Yes.
They don't have the skills. They're not equipped yet to cope with
Mhm.
this new change, this transition that they've never went through before.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and whether that is we were planning on going to ice cream and now that's not happening or
Mhm.
whatever it might
I
be.
can't find my shoe and I'm running late to
Yes.
get to school. Uh-huh.
Or I wanted to wear 2 shoes that are different colors
Uh-huh.
and they both happen to be left feet and
Yep.
it doesn't feel good on my right foot.
Yes.
All those little things.
And I can feel the tag in my back shirt.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's
Uh-huh.
a really important thing for us to talk about too. Those
Mhm.
we in behavior analysis we call them setting events. And I'm
Mhm.
getting excited and starting to talk too fast, so
I'm
I'm
ready
gonna
for you to
deep
nerd
breath.
out. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So setting events are those things that sit over everything else and they color how intense is the trigger, how big is the behavior, and how sensitive am I to the consequence of those behaviors, whether those consequences are awesome or horrendous.
Mhm.
It just colors everything. So the example I give parents is like, hey, it's a rainbow day. I just got asked out. It's my birthday and I got 3 puppies.
Woohoo!
Nothing can go wrong. The biggest
Uh-huh.
trigger can happen. I'm going to be walking
You're
on
feeling
sunshine.
good.
Or the opposite. Someone just broke up with me. I had a loss in the family
Mhm.
and I forgot my lunch at home. No
Oh.
matter how good stuff is, or if
Mhm.
something bad happens, heaven forbid, I'm going to be in a really tough spot.
Yep.
So looking at like the little tag on the
Mhm.
back of the shirt,
Mhm.
those little sensory things and all those little things, how do you talk to parents about like that? Those, again, from my side, we call them setting events.
Uh-huh.
How do you talk about those little things that just make everything else a little more pokey?
Yes. Yes, we call those context clues.
Ooh, love it.
So we call those context clues. So when a parent is met with a child who is dysregulated, they're crying, they're throwing their bodies, I don't want to do this. This is not fair.
Mm-hmm.
Whew. We just encourage them, take a deep breath. Let's take a minute and step back and
Mm-hmm.
identify what are the context clues and what is the function of the current behavior.
Mm.
And so when we look
Oh,
at,
I love
I know,
that.
I was like, I knew she was going to like the function of the, yeah, little FBA talk here.
Yep.
So we ask for what is the function of the behavior and
Mhm.
let's look for the context clues. And so I encourage my parents to become little detectives
Beautiful.
where they take a magnifying glass and look at what are the clues that led up to the event. So say their child woke up on the wrong side of the bed,
Mm-hmm.
they're a little grouchy, maybe that's just their temperament in the morning. But
Sure.
then it might be compounded by, there might have been a transition in the week, or it's raining out and they weren't expecting it to rain because it's field day, or
Mm-hmm.
all of these little things that build up over time. And then the catalyst of all of these things might be a tag on the back of their shirt. And so it's not about the tag,
Mm-hmm.
it's about everything else.
Yeah.
And so when I encourage my parents to step back, they can see, okay, the tag is really the tipping point. And yes, it is scratchy and uncomfortable, and maybe they have sensory issues on top of that. So that might lead to a different conversation. But when we look at all of those pieces together, we can be a lot more empathetic and
Mhm.
understanding of, wow, they need support in this moment, not just with the tag, but everything else that led up to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And our young folks, just like you said earlier, just don't have those skills yet.
They do not have the skills.
I think that's one of the toughest things when I'm working with families and working with parents is those moments of what they should,
Mhm.
like by this age they should, because I
Mhm.
think so they should. And there's nothing wrong with having high expectations, of course.
Yeah.
And there's those really tough moments of this is where I was hoping, I was wishing, I was expecting my child to be,
Yes.
and they're not there right now.
Mhm.
I imagine that there's some, I see it in my work. I imagine you see in yours too, some grieving in those moments of like,
A lot of grief.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
How does that show up for your clients?
Yeah, there's a huge grieving point when doing parent work
Hmm.
because you're grappling with the reality of I thought my child was here
Hmm.
and they're not.
Mm,
I wish they could be here and they're not yet. And so we like to sit with that and grieve it and allow it to be, yeah, of course you're upset about that. You
mhm.
wanted them to be here and they're not yet. We use a lot of yet language.
Yeah,
And it depends on what's going on, but I like to use those moments as opportunities to identify where do you want your child to be?
sure.
Great. This is a great goal to work towards. How do we get there together? How do we get there as we collaboratively work together as a team to make it there? Is that realistic? And so we
Yeah,
want to then, from that point, say, this is where we want them to be. Let's take maybe 5 steps back, maybe 10 steps back, maybe 2. It just depends on where the child is at. And then say, how do we help the child be successful
sure. Meet
with
them
the
where they're
skills?
at.
Meet them where they're
Mhm.
at, and then build upon those skills. But we have to grieve. Unless we grieve and accept that sadness, it's hard to move forward for anybody.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. I think when I'm thinking about the grief moments and the shame moments and all the tough moments
Mhm.
that come around behavior and those big explosions that can happen, one of the things that I'm thinking about is how that affects the relationship itself. Like
Mhm.
how in those moments of incredible difficulty,
Mhm.
when a child is absolutely having a tough time and it's triggering, we've got full
Uh-huh.
activation for the parents, being able to repair that connection.
Mhm.
What sort of things do you work on that front?
Mhm. So when it comes to repair and reconciliation,
Mhm.
I tell my parents, they do not have to be perfect
Mm,
at all. They are in a learning phase just like their child is. And so I use a lot of grace language because I want families to know that they have the freedom to mess up all the time. But how we repair and how
yeah.
we come back together is what makes a difference. And that's ultimately the main skill that we want to teach kids is fall on your face.
Yeah.
Mess up, really just botch
Yeah.
it, but stand back up and try again and own up to it. Take responsibility. And so if parents can learn how to do that and come back and say, "Wow, I wish I didn't yell during that moment. I am
Mm,
so sorry. I wish I would have taken a moment and taken a break and
yeah.
had 5 deep breaths and then tried again. Can you forgive me? Can we try again?" If we start to build in those reparative moments, it can be transformative for the relationship because
Yeah.
whatever happens, you know that, okay, we're in a growth mindset. We're always growing, we're always evolving, we're always falling on our face
Mhm.
because life is about change. They're going to have to try again. But if we can figure out how do we safely learn to come back,
Sure.
that that just brings healing and safety in the relationship, and that's really the goal.
Absolutely. I think that's something else we can touch on here is there's when we've got a goal, especially when we're talking about challenging behavior and we're working
Mhm.
toward a goal, there are plenty of things that are quote unquote effective,
Mhm.
but not very pretty that can get us there.
Yeah.
Like we can stop this behavior by,
Mhm.
let's say, screaming
Right.
and just scaring a child, and that
Mhm.
will probably stop some meltdowns.
Right.
It may not align with our values. So I
Mhm.
wonder when you're going through goals and you're working on how do we get to those goals,
Mhm.
how do values inform
Mm.
creating that plan together?
Mhm. That's a great topic. Values. When I work with families, I like them to identify their family values,
Mhm.
their parenting values, and then the values that they hope to instill in their kids. And so we actually use values as a driver and a lens for how do we meet these goals. And so
Mhm.
I'll have parents that have different views than I do about how to meet those goals. And then we'll talk about I want to respect your views and your perspective
Mhm.
and understand how do we integrate your values? Does this actually line up with your values? And more often than not, that's where we have a little bit of a discrepancy is
Mm,
what they tend to do naturally, what a parent
sure.
might think, oh, I grew up doing this thing to stop a behavior, or oh, this is how my family did it.
Mhm.
When we talk about values, it tends to shift the conversation a little bit. And that's where the work starts because we can understand okay, you're saying your values are respect and open communication and whatever it is.
Mhm.
And does this match up?
Does your behavior match
Does
up
your
with
behavior
your
match up with
values?
your values?
Yeah,
And that can kind of shift the conversation and then help guide our goals.
sure.
Hmm.
Absolutely. And I definitely see that in my work as well. I want to go back. You said that you specialize specifically in adoption and foster care.
Hmm.
And that when we have adoption foster care in a family, you're bringing a lot into your family and there can be a
Yes.
lot of shift that
Hmm.
occurs, especially if this is, you've already have other children in the family.
Right.
There can be so much shift and you're working to align your values as you're helping integrate a new beautiful human into your
Hmm.
life. When you're working in adoption and foster care, what sort of things are you bringing forward? What sort of tools or perspectives do you think are really important
Hmm.
to have with a family?
Yes. The first thing that came to mind, which might be countercultural to what people typically think when they think of as an adoption.
Mhm.
What I found in working with families who have adopted a child is they think of it, when they come in, their lens is it's supposed to be this beautiful, wonderful,
Sure,
joyous
the
thing.
Instagram
This
perfect.
Instagram
Yep.
perfect.
Mhm.
We're stepping in and we're supporting this child and we're giving them new life. And
Mhm.
so I use the language both and a lot.
Ooh, yeah.
Because it's both can be beautiful and wonderful. And when it comes to adoption, there tends to be a lot of grief that a
Sure.
lot of families do not anticipate. And so the tools that I use when I work with families who have adopted a child or a teen or even an infant is we do a lot of timelines. And so we
Mhm.
do adoption narratives, we do adoption timelines, but we also create grief maps where
Mm.
we map out different areas of grief. And that kind of ties back to the conversation of shame that we had.
Yeah.
There tends to be a lot of shame and grief in there that families don't always know what to do with it because it wasn't part of the expected journey when they enrolled in this journey of working with a child and adopting them and making them a part of their own. So there's a lot of different tools that we use, but grief maps are a really helpful one. And then also identifying an adoption narrative. And so we
Mm.
create a lot of books together. We
Yeah.
answer questions. There's a lot of different things we do, but grief is the topic that came to mind that usually isn't expected for the families that I work with.
Sure. On the other side of the break, I want to talk a little bit more about those specific skills that or supports that you just talked
Mhm.
about, the grief maps
Mhm.
and the books.
Mhm.
We will be right back on the other side of this break. You're listening to the Helpers Hour on Nextdoor Radio, nextdoorradio.com, the Nextdoor Radio app. We'll see you in just a moment.
Plumpy's Deli is a family-owned and operated local business located in Butner that uses only the finest meats from Boar's Head. All items are made fresh to order, and they are now serving breakfast all day long. They offer charcuterie boxes, boards, classes, and grazing tables, along with catering for all occasions, including corporate luncheons, private events, weddings, school events, parties, and more. Gluten-free and vegetarian options are available. Call 919-575-0705 to place your order today. You won't be disappointed. Plumpy's Deli is open 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday. Visit their website and check out their menu at www.plumpies.com. That's PLUMPEEZ.com. Make sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram at Plumpy's Deli, and don't forget to stop by their location at 106 East C Street in Butner. Give them a call at 919-575-0705. Visit their website and follow them on social media for more information today.
Western. Boots, belts, buckles, bolos, hats, and Western saddles. Come by and see how Parham Outfitters has not lost its Western roots. And check out their nice selection of firearms as well. They're located at 946 West Andrews Avenue in the Crossroads Shopping Center on I-85 exit 214. Stop by Parham Outfitters today to see how they can help you. Need a place for a one-stop shop for all your advertising and promotional items? Outside the Box Promotions and Apparel has you covered for screen printing, vinyl, heat transfer, embroidery, plaques, banners, yard sales, laser engraving, and even medals and coins. Outside the Box Promotions and Apparel prides themselves in the quality of their work and has quick turnaround times. A one-stop shop for all your advertising and promotional needs. Call today at 252-213-4072. Visit their website at www.otb27537.com for more information. Outside the Box Promotions and Apparel is your one-stop shop. Outside the Box is located on Industry Drive in Henderson.
Do you have an event, upcoming show, or update about the community? If so, send your public service announcement to contact@nextdoorradio.com or send by mail to P.O. Box 2491, Oxford, North Carolina.
Welcome back to the Helpers Hour on Nextdoor Radio, nextdoorradio.com, and the Nextdoor Radio app. I am your host, Kellie Syfan. The Helpers Hour, is brought to you by Clove Hitch Behavior, where we help with tantrums and meltdowns, fears and phobias, and behaviors resulting from trauma. You can contact me by calling or texting 919-579-6192 or going to chbehavior.com. We're coming back to our conversation with Dr. Bree of The Landing Place. I want to talk a little bit more about adoption and foster care. That's something very close to my heart that I want to make sure we get as much good information out about. First, that's something that can expand our beautiful families
Yes.
and that there's support for families that are going through the adoption and foster care process.
Mhm.
Before the break, we were talking about grief maps and adoption narratives. Can you tell me a little
Yes.
bit more about what a grief map is and how you'd use it to help support a adoption or foster care family?
Absolutely. So, grief maps are a wonderful tool where you map out by writing, drawing, or even talking through areas of grief in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And so the child can do this and the parent or the caregiver can do this. Where, when it comes to adoption specifically, there's a lot of different experiences on both ends of things, different expectations, different desires, and then different actual experiences on the child side and the caregiver side.
Mhm.
And so a grief map is actually allowing each child, teen, or caregiver to label this is actually a moment of grief that I want to share with this caregiver.
Mm.
When I work with families that have adopted, we really want to focus on the relationship
Mhm.
between the child and the parent or the caregiver. And so part of that is allowing grief maps to be an opening point of conversation of this map, this grief area is an area where I actually need some support.
Mm.
I need you to listen. I need you to see my drawing. I need you to join me in this memory because it feels really scary to think of it by myself. And so the grief map is actually, it's just a map if you think about
Sure.
it, or a giant timeline, or people can just talk it through, but it's a sequential way to map out these are the areas that feel overwhelming. These are the grief areas that I'd like to share. And so I have the child do it and also the parent do it
Mhm.
to both label and honor the areas of grief in their life that they may not have shared with one another.
Sure, sure.
Mhm.
And imagine having both the child and the caregivers
Mhm.
doing this.
Yes.
You would have that connection moment of, oh, we've both been through some really tough points.
Hmm.
Would the other children that are perhaps already in the family also be involved in creating grief maps?
Yes, when it comes to family therapy, we can integrate all family members.
Awesome.
And so I'll kind of weave that into talking about the adoption narratives.
Yes.
The adoption narratives are also a way for each person in the family to create their own story of what the experience was like for them. And also include questions within that narrative of these are things that I want to know.
Oh, yeah.
These are the questions that I have that I haven't had answered yet.
Mhm.
And so if we can create a story with questions and gaps in there,
Mhm.
that's where we can have the child, the sibling, the parent, the caregiver all fill in the gaps a little bit together. And so if a child says, hey, I don't know this about my biological parent,
Mhm. Mhm.
then we can bring that to the caregiver, and the caregiver or parent can say, okay, let's find this answer together.
Sure.
I actually don't know either. Let's find it out. The parent might know, and there might be information that they can't share because it's beyond the developmentally appropriate time frame.
Sure.
But they can say, this sounds really important. And that's a big question to hold by yourself. I want to hold it with you,
Mhm.
and let's find it together, or let's make sure to look into this together at another time.
Gotcha. So it doesn't have to be, oh, I don't know.
Right? Ooh,
Yeah.
yep. That awkward, walking on eggshells. And a lot of
Sure.
times parents are unsure of what do I share?
Oh,
Right.
absolutely.
What does a child know? What do they not know?
Mhm.
And these adoption narratives are a great way to understand and see what
Mhm.
the child actually knows and where are the gaps. Where do we need to lean
Gotcha.
into to help them?
So almost assessing a little bit for where their comfort levels are and where their
Absolutely.
knowledge is.
Mm-hmm.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
I know that adoption and foster care can be fraught with a lot of different big emotions, a lot of different reasons people get involved. I know one of the questions that I've gotten from many of my adoption families is, when do I tell my child that they've been adopted?
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that, if you're open to sharing?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a big question that's asked all the time. When is the right time? And so there's so many layers to this, but we
Mhm.
have to think about what is the age of the child,
Mhm.
developmentally, socially, and emotionally, where are they at? What is their readiness? If a child is asking, if they're noticing, hey, my hair looks different than yours,
Sure.
or my skin color doesn't look the same as yours.
Mhm.
Kids are so receptive. Even from a young age, kids understand nuances in race, in culture, in just their being. I mean, kids are so observant and
Yeah.
incredible. They notice those things early on. And so once children start to vocalize those things, that's a really good clue or indication. Okay, they might be ready to just know.
Gotcha.
And so I always encourage parents, children, you can start small.
Mm-hmm.
There's this fear of, oh my gosh, if I say it all, do I have to say it all right now? No, it's a journey. Just like your relationship builds and unfolds, the information that you share can also build and unfold as the child is developmentally ready. As your relationship grows, you can share different bits of information. So I always say, if they're starting to give verbal cues and noticing differences, acknowledge those. Absolutely. You look different than other kids do, or you look different than I do. We have, I have straight hair, you have curly hair. My skin is X, Y, and your skin is this color. If we start to label it and acknowledge it, it's a joining act. We can join in those things and say, you've noticed those things for so long. Let me tell you where that comes from. And that's
Gotcha.
how you can start that conversation.
Yeah. I imagine some families would want support in that conversation, and within an office at the landing place might be a good place to let's talk through this together.
Absolutely. And it's also a great place for parents to have their own space to work through their own reactions and their own fears and anxiety of, oh my goodness, what if they think this? What if I overshare? I'm a big proponent of let's fall on our face. But let's do it in a safe place, right?
Yes,
and so
absolutely.
That's where the parent support can come in, and we can talk through, let's label all of our fears, get it all out there. Let's practice the conversation, and then we can present it to your child together.
Sure, absolutely. And what are some of the things that bring families into adoption and foster care that like the crux of my question is, it's such a beautiful thing. And I know a lot of people are interested in being involved in either adoption or foster care or both. What are some of the things that bring folks into being a family of adoption and foster care?
Yes. So there can be a variety of reasons that bring families into foster adoptive care. One of my areas of focus and specialty is actually faith integration, specifically Christian integration with psychology.
Yeah.
And so the topic that I'll kind of focus on now is the families that I work with who come from a religious or spiritual background.
Absolutely.
So Christian families that I have worked with feel, that God has led them to be able to carry on and take care of more children. And so they might feel that God is encouraging them to lean into foster or adoption. And that might be one of the reasons. And so the topic of faith integration is actually a pretty big one because, and this might be a little bit of a touchy subject, but I don't want to be naive and not label that there is sometimes this conversation of what is the savior complex. And so in Christian circles, at times they have been, I guess there's been a conversation of, is this related to a savior complex of we want to rescue and save this child from this horrible situation, or is it something else? And so that's something that I actually talk openly with my families about is, tell me your adoption story. Tell me what brought you here as a caregiver. Tell me your story leading up to this moment. And if there was some form of a savior complex, maybe they're a family that grew up in the missions field, or maybe they grew up in a religious circle that they were taught, oh my goodness, this is what we have to do. We have to rescue. God has allowed us to save all of these people, whatever it is. We talk about all of those things because we want to make sure that they can safely talk about it, deconstruct any unhealthy aspects of it, because the reality is no journey is going to be perfect. It's not going to be crystal clear. And so labeling things as they are, that's, again, it kind of loops back to shame, but I'll have families share, I didn't realize I kind of had the savior complex until they get into working with their child who's had all of this trauma, and it's a lot harder than what they anticipated.
You must hit such a deep connection with folks coming from that perspective of, hey, Let's explore all the pieces of this.
Exactly.
Something I talk to parents about a lot is we all have all the best and worst parts of humanity in us because we are
Yes.
human.
Uh-huh.
And so when behaviors that we engage in, we realize later don't align with our values, it gives us a point of growth.
Right.
It can become a point of shame if we let it, but it
Yes.
gives us a point of growth if we're willing to shine some light on it
Mhm.
and choose something different. I
Absolutely.
think that's incredible that you're going in and going, hey, let's explore. Like, yeah, this is
Mhm.
a spot that you may not want to look at.
Mhm.
Let's explore it, see what parts apply or don't,
Exactly.
and move forward from there so you can have the most
Right.
beautiful family you can.
Mhm.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think that's an important thing that you mentioned there too, that, you know, parenting in general, whether it's through foster care, through adoption, through birth, whatever it may
Mhm.
be, is so much harder. I
Mm.
say as somebody who doesn't have kids,
Mhm.
so much harder than people realize.
It is so
And
hard.
again, I'm not a parent, so I don't even know how much harder it is. I see the
Mhm.
pieces of it that I can understand from the outside.
Right.
And I know if I ever do become a parent, there
Mhm.
will be parts that I was not expecting.
Oh
And are
yes. Absolutely.
way harder than I expected.
Uh-huh.
When you hit those moments, what are some things that people can consider or lean back on to help them go through the like, whoa, I didn't realize I was signing up for this as well. I
Mhm.
didn't realize this was going to be a component. What
Mhm.
are your thoughts on that?
Mhm. Ugh, I mean, there's so many different things that are kind of floating through my head, but
Sure.
when families meet that point where they're like, "Oh my goodness, this is way bigger than I thought it was. Oh, this feels so much heavier."
Mm.
We I like to say, "Wow." And thank goodness we can label it.
Oh, I love that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because more often than not, when families are in it, they are beyond labeling. This is where I'm at.
Hmm.
But I actually find that as a really good point to say, okay, we are way above our heads right now. Ooh,
Hmm.
this feels huge.
Hmm.
Okay, has there ever been a time where you have felt completely out of control?
Sure.
Has there ever been a time where you realized, wow, I have no idea what I'm doing? And then we laugh and we talk about, oh my goodness, most areas of my life, I don't know what I'm doing. We are just
it
doing the
starts
best we
there.
can. It starts there. And so we start by labeling it and acknowledging, wow, this feels huge.
Mm,
Thank goodness we can name it.
yeah.
Because and I say all the time, if we can name it, we can tame it.
Oh, I'm stealing that.
Totally steal
Yep.
it. Name it to tame it. And so if we
Yeah.
name and label what it is, then we can say, wow, this is out of my control, but I can actually lean in right here. This is out of my control, but I can learn more here. This feels scary. Okay, that's a place where we can work with. It's families that, normally when we feel so many things,
Hmm.
it's hard to identify where to go next. But once we can name it, we've got a place to move.
Gotcha. Oh, I
Mhm.
love that. We're going to finish up our conversation after this last break. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Helpers Hour on Nextdoor Radio, nextdoorradio.com, the Nextdoor Radio app. We'll see you on the other side.
Nextdoor Radio is your local online next-door neighbor. We strive to bring you local content such as local talk, local news, local sports, with a great mix of 70s, 80s, classic rock, and beach music. Visit nextdoorradio.com and make sure to download the Nextdoor Radio app to stay up to date.
As a gentle breeze of May brushes across our beautiful North Carolina, we pause to remember. This Memorial Day, we reflect on the ultimate sacrifice made by our brave men and women in uniform. At Island Breeze HVAC, we understand the depth of this sacrifice. Our founder, a fourth-generation combat veteran, and our team stand in solemn gratitude. We honor the memory of our fallen heroes, their families, and the legacy they've left behind. Island Breeze HVAC, serving with integrity and honoring our heroes.
Families Living Violence Free is Granville County's domestic violence and sexual assault crisis center with a mission of giving voice and support to domestic violence and sexual assault victims. Families Living Violence Free offers a 24/7 domestic violence and sexual assault crisis line, individual supportive counseling for adults and children, customized safety planning and support groups, and so much more. Call 919-693-5700 or para marcar en español 919-690-0888. Visit flvf.org today to see how they can help you or to see how you can support them. That's flvf.org.
Hi, this is Kellie Syfan with Clove Hitch Behavior. I focus on changing behavior while protecting the spirit. My big focuses are on helping with tantrums and meltdowns, fears and phobias, and behaviors resulting from trauma. You can have one-on-one sessions with me at my farm in Franklinton, or I have a tantrums and meltdowns library available at any time. When you have access, it's for a lifetime. You're going to have access to the walkthrough videos, to a vetted resource library with resources from around the world, as well as professionals around the country. From that, you'll be able to figure out what you can do for your family to make the changes that you want to see to reach the goals that matter most to you in your life. For more information, you can go to www.chbehavior.com or call or text 919-579-6192.
Sorry.
Welcome back to the Helpers Hour on Next Door Radio, nextdoorradio.com, and the Next Door Radio app. I'm telling you guys, we're having way too much fun in the breaks. And I'm sad to end this conversation, but we're in our last section with Dr. Bree from the Landing Place. We've had an incredible conversation about everything that you do. We've talked about your one-on-one therapy and your family therapy, but I know you've got some other things available, like trainings and presentations. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So one thing that I'm passionate about is equipping parents and families and communities with information about what to do next. And so I also offer training opportunities and presentations to cover topics such as ADHD, what is parent support, how do we support kids with anxiety, what are the benefits of getting your kid tested through psychological testing or neuropsych evaluations to lead to IEPs and 504s. Presentations and trainings are really fun and they're really interactive. And so that's another thing that I offer at the Landing Place.
Oh, that's wonderful. So like even deeper than psychoeducation, bringing groups together to get that, hey, this is how you get the steps started to be able to find more support. I love that.
And these are little tools to just get your toes wet a little bit.
Yeah.
Dip your toes in.
Yeah. So if somebody is listening and they're going, hey, I think I would really like to talk with you. What are the best ways to get a hold of you?
So the best way to get a hold of me is to call or text me at 919-410-8183, or go ahead and reach my website at thelandingplacecounseling.com. So even though my practice is The Landing Place, my website is thelandingplacecounseling.com.
Gotcha.
So they can go ahead and send me a contact form, and then I'll be able to follow up and reach out to them.
Sure. And then what are going to be your best clients? Like, hey, it's this age range, or we've talked a little bit about specific diagnoses or different things going on.
Yes.
What sorts of families and folks should be reaching out to you?
So the youngest that I work with is age 4. And so parents of littles who are struggling with tantrums and outbursts and transitions and change, those are great families to work with. And so I can offer PCIT.
What's that?
Yes, thank you. Parent-child interaction therapy.
Perfect.
So it's a certain type of therapy that can focus on the parent-child relationship. The other type of therapy that families would want to reach out for is, so if you're beyond 4, anything really between age 4 and 21.
Wow.
Yeah, so I see quite a wide range, but I love my itty bitties. We have a lot of fun with them. I offer play therapy for my middle-aged kiddos, and then I see a lot of teens. So any family that needs additional support with ADHD, anxiety, those tantrums, behavioral outbursts, the parent that is really struggling and thinking, I really don't understand what's happening. I'm concerned. My child or teen is withdrawing. They're feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling overwhelmed. Those are the families that can come on in. Again, we've talked about trauma, adoption, and also children or teens that have been through the foster care system. But those are just a couple of families. And then the last group is I see a lot of families that are seeking a clinician who can integrate Christianity and Christian integration within psychology.
Gotcha. Absolutely. So a bunch of different folks that you can
Yes,
serve.
so I see a lot of different families.
Yeah.
Keeps things exciting.
Yes, I like that as well. Having a couple different facets keeps everything fresh and make sure that we're, as clinicians, constantly learning.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, one of the things I always ask at the end of my interviews is if somebody just caught one thing from this whole interview, what would you like for them to have heard? And it could be a tip or trick. It can be a word of encouragement. Anything that, if It was like, man, if you soaked up nothing, I hope you soaked up this little nugget. And you can be talking specifically to one of the kind of target audiences that you work with. That you're like,
Yeah.
man, I really hope that y'all hear this. Or if it's just something general, that's fine too. But what's something that you hope you leave folks with today?
Yeah. There's so many little things.
There
but
are. You can do
there's
more
so many
than
little
one.
nuggets.
We
Okay.
got time.
Okay. So I would say if I could have one takeaway,
Mhm.
it's really, whether it's me or somebody else, find a clinician who you can feel safe with.
Ooh, I love that.
So find a clinician who you can just be yourself and unpack the scariest parts that you never thought you'd share with anybody else. And so, I didn't talk about consultations are a huge way to just find a connection. And so I guess my takeaway is find somebody who you can find a safe landing place, find safety and security in, because once you feel connected in that relationship, immense change can come out of that.
I love that. That it comes from the clinical relationship.
clinical
that
relationship.
We can have that relationship to work from, that rapport to
Yes.
work from.
And then I would say my second takeaway is, no matter what happens, no matter how many times we screw up as parents, reconciliation and repair are the best way to foster a relationship. So always come back to owning up, saying I'm sorry, and trying again. Those are the biggest life lessons that you can teach your kid and that they will take with them. They will remember the repair over anything else.
Oh, I love that. That's absolutely beautiful. Before we sign off today, I want you to give your contact information one more time, just to make sure that everybody has got it that wants to get a hold of you.
Sounds great. So my phone number is 919-410-8183.
And that is call or text, correct?
Call or text.
Beautiful.
Absolutely. Or I can be reached at thelandingplacecounseling.com, and I'm located in Wake Forest.
Perfect. And real quick, you offer in-person and virtual, correct?
In person and virtual.
Perfect. Do you have current availability at this point?
I do. My availability is currently early afternoon. And so that might be a place where families, now that we're going into summer, can transition into those spots a little bit more.
Time to get in.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can tell from my practice, and I'm sure you see this too, summer hits and everything fills up. So
everything changes.
If you need some support, now is a great time to reach out and get in. Like you said, have a consultation, make sure you feel safe, and move forward getting into services. I love it. Dr. Bree, this has been absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much for joining us today from the landing place here on Next Door Radio for the Helpers Hour. Thank you, everybody, for coming and listening today. We are so excited to have you every week, the 10 o'clock hour on Next Door Radio, nextdoorradio.com, the Next Door Radio app. We'll see you next week.